Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so glad you are joining me today. If you haven't grabbed your journal, this would be a great time to do that. You can get it for absolutely free. It's at Kristen, Kristen, Boyce.com/free resources. It pairs wonderfully with today's episode on signs of codependency. I am so excited about my guest, Michelle Farris. We talked about how do you know if you're a codependent? What exactly is codependency? How do I know if one of my behaviors is kind of codependent? Where does codependency come from? And then how do I begin to heal and work through codependency? Kind of the impact it has on ourselves and our family system and breaking that generational cycle. It's a packed episode that you will find some practical tools and also get a really clear picture of what codependency is. It's on a spectrum and what you might be doing in your own life with relationships. It could be in parenting. It could be with a romantic partner, a best friend, a coworker. It can be in any relationship. So it's really important to another family member to take a look at. Let me tell you a little bit about Michelle. Michelle Farris is a licensed psychotherapist, codependency expert, and course creator. She helps people create healthy relationships without sacrificing their big hearts. She's written several ebooks and online courses on relationship skills. She has been featured in several online publications and podcasts. In her private practice, she provides practical tools to build self-trust and healthy relationships. She can often be found with a venti latte from Starbucks while working on her next course. I think you'll get a lot out of this episode. If you're having trouble explaining or understanding what is codependency exactly, hopefully you'll have so much clarity after this episode. And there'll be many invitations for all of us to continue looking at our own work and our own healing journey. So here is my interview on codependency with Michelle Farris. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so excited to talk about this topic. I feel like we talk about it, we touch our toe in the water, but we haven't really dove deeply into the topic of codependency. And I have many clients that have struggled over the years with codependency, naming it, kind of figuring out what is it exactly. And I have clients trying to explain it to their partner, like, okay, I'm really a codependent and let me explain it to you. So Michelle Farris, welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is lovely.
I'm so happy you're on the podcast today. So let's start off telling the audience a little bit about you and how you got started with doing codependent work.
So I'm a therapist in recovery. So I started my own journey of recovery probably when I was about 21. And I soon realized my relationships were a mess and I hadn't completed my license yet or anything. So I did all that. And then as I really got into my own recovery, I realized that's my love. That's what I wanted to focus on because there were so many gaps, especially, I don't think I was licensed until I was in my 30s. So it took a while because I had a kid and all that. But it was really important for me to realize where my gaps were. And I had some huge gaps. And so that's what made me want to go into this work because I realized, oh my gosh, these are the gaps I want to share with other people so that they can recover faster than I did.
I love that. Okay, so let's jump into what exactly is codependency. For those that are like, I'm having trouble explaining it to people, they don't really get it.
Yeah.
How do you explain it simply?
Okay. So for me, it's a relationship pattern where you hyper focus on others by helping, rescuing, or controlling them, which ends up creating an unhealthy dependency and a lack of self-trust. So these are the people who are over helpers, over functioning in relationship, looking for their approval and validation outside of themselves because they don't know how to give it to themselves.
Okay. Would this be somebody, because I have several clients that are trying to get their arms around this concept.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
would you say somebody that is looking to their partner to like meet their needs? Like, are you mad at me? Are you upset with me? Do you want me? Do you love me? Like they're
Yeah.
constantly looking for that. Would
Yes.
that be a part of codependency?
Yes. It's different if you're looking for some love and affection and validation from your partner. We all want that. But if that's your only source, or that is 75% of your source, that's a problem because that creates that unhealthy dependency. Whereas if somebody needs that from their partner, which again, we all do, but they have other sources, they have friendships, they have hobbies, they have a relationship with themselves where they feel grounded within themselves and can take care of themselves emotionally, then you don't have that codependency on others.
Okay. So what are some of the red flags for codependence to know that you're a codependent? Like, how does somebody go, you know what?
Yeah.
That's one of the red flags for me. What are
Yeah.
those?
So if you're giving to other people and you resent it on the back end or feel taken advantage of, that's a huge sign that you're over giving. Not being able to set boundaries because you're afraid of what the other person is going to think, or maybe they're going to get mad at you. Being super sensitive. And this is a gift, right? We're really good at taking the emotional temperature of the room, but we're doing that to make sure we're safe because we don't feel safe if somebody else has an upset feeling, because we're going to take that feeling personally. In relationships, there's no balance. We do it all. We're over giving, over functioning, and we end up feeling invisible because we don't ask for what we need. We don't even know what we need some of the time, because when you're hyper focused on somebody else, you're not going to know what you need. You're going to get really good at knowing what other people need because that's your ticket to love.
Okay. So someone is really focused on another person and they're like, if they would just go to therapy, if they would just become more emotionally available, if they would just, like, you're so focused on what they need to do, would that be a red flag?
Yes. And you can do this with your kids. If only my kid were better behaved and was an A student and was inside of the box, I would be a good mom. Therefore, I would be okay. Or my best friend. Women can do this with each other. Where, I mean, I was in a codependent friendship years ago, and this was incredibly painful, but it was the best lesson of my recovery because I realized I had made that other person my higher power, thinking it was safe because it was a girlfriend, but it wasn't.
So you kind of recognize, oh, I got overly attached and connected. Okay. So when we talk about becoming aware of codependency and we're starting to kind of pull the curtain back, if you will, how do we even develop codependency? Like, where does that even come from for those that are not familiar with it? And you go, well, why did I become a codependent?
Right. Well, it usually starts in families where parents are either emotionally unavailable or just not equipped to parent well. And let's face it, nobody gets a rule book. And our parenting tends to come from either the parenting we had or we do just the opposite, which isn't necessarily healthy either. So the child is seen and not heard. Feelings are a threat because usually the parent has their focus on their life and their issues and their mental health challenges. They end up raising kids that are quiet, people pleasers, people who overachieve because the needs of a child become too overwhelming for the parent. So they just can't deal with them.
So they become these people pleasers. We want to get our worth and value and significance from other people or achieving. And then we feel like somebody, then we feel important and that we matter and that we're enough until we need the next thing.
Right. Because the one thing, if you're a parent right now, the one thing I would say to do is validate your child emotionally, validate their experience, because that's going to help them grow that self-trust, which is the antidote really to codependency. Because when you trust yourself, you start to like yourself and you feel more confident because you're like, hey, what I'm seeing is being validated versus no, that didn't happen. Daddy didn't yell at you. Nobody's drinking heavily. Everything's fine, which sets up the child to be gaslit.
And then doubt themselves, like question, well, maybe
like, oh my
maybe they're
God,
not doing
the sky isn't, the sky isn't blue, which is maddening.
Which then becomes kind of a normal for you when you pick a partner, like to be gaslit or to be told, no, that's not really what I said.
Right.
And so that becomes almost like a normal part of the family system.
Yeah, and that's where love becomes dysfunctional because we think that's love because it's familiar versus no, that's really not healthy love. That's manipulation.
Okay, what are the first steps to start recovery? Like if someone says, you know what, this is
Mhm.
sounding a
Yeah,
little, this is hitting a button, this is sounding like I could be a codependent. Where
yeah.
does someone begin to start the recovery process?
So the first step I would say is getting the right support. Doing this work by yourself is really tough. People aren't going to be able, it's like going on a diet. You may last a couple weeks, but after that, you burn out because you don't have support. That's why Weight Watchers is big. So finding Al Anon or CODA or ACA, those are all free 12-step programs that deal with issues of codependency. You could start your own. That's not the easiest because you have to have like-minded people and you have to be the engine that starts it. But all those meetings, thanks to the pandemic, are on Zoom. So finding that source of support, if you can afford therapy and do that, ideally, I think it's both group support and professional help because codependency isn't something we do once a week. We do it several times a day. So we need a lot more support. There's three areas of focus that I like to talk about. Is one is the building self-esteem and self-trust, because that's going to help switch the focus from what other people are doing to what you're doing and what you need. The second part is assessing your relationships. And this is the tough one to look at. Are your relationships one-sided? Are they toxic? Are you giving too much? Are you over-functioning? And then the last piece is family of origin work. And that usually comes later when people are starting to connect the dots of, wow, I keep attracting the same person over and over again. Then you start to go be willing to do therapy. And that can be a super important aspect of codependency recovery.
Yeah. Would you say it's the key aspect, like doing your own inner child family of origin work? I
Yeah,
feel like it's so key.
it is. But a lot of people are really intimidated by it because of the pain. So it's totally okay. That's the one piece that it's really okay to wait until you're ready. But the first two pieces, you can get a lot of relief doing that work.
Okay, let's talk about when you think you're helping someone else. Like, I'm just trying to be helpful.
Yeah, I know.
Talk about that concept.
Well, even as a therapist, when I look at my personal life, do people really ask for help? They want to be heard. They want me to listen. So part of what happens when you're codependent is you don't wait to be asked. You jump in because that's your heart is wanting to help, but you're not realizing that the other person may not need it. They may need another form of support from you. So if you feel compulsive to help, that's an issue. Or if someone else's upset is making you upset, that's a really important sign because that tells you you can't tolerate someone else's pain, most likely because it's triggering your own pain. So you want to fix it and then feel better, but that doesn't last.
So, what does codependency look like with parenting? You mentioned it. And I don't think a lot of people have connected that codependency and parenting. They connect
Oh,
codependency in a
yeah.
romantic relationship, but
Yes.
not in parenting. So let's talk a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
that. What does that look like,
Mm-hmm.
codependency as a parent?
So, codependency in parenting is like your child's success or failure is a reflection of you personally. So, all these parents that have kids outside the box with ADD or behavioral issues, they're swimming in it, going, oh my God, what's wrong with me that my neighbor's kid is getting straight A's, but my kid isn't? So, we take it personally versus, wait a minute, kids are their own being and they get born with a certain temperament. And there's a lot of factors that go into mental health issues, and the parent isn't necessarily to blame. Now, in adult relationships with your kids, it can look like maybe your child is your best friend or confidant, and you look to your kid, no matter what age they are, for advice. Or dad is really being mean to me. I'm going to tell you all about it. And the child's like, oh my God, I don't want to hear this. This isn't any of my business. But the child feels obligated because it's mom. So there's an unhealthy dependency versus a healthy parent, which is my life is my responsibility. You be a child, you focus on yourself because that's what you need to do to grow up. And there's going to be a boundary between what the parent experiences versus what the child experiences. Now, that doesn't mean you don't share your feelings. If a parent's upset, they may say, I'm going through a hard time right now, but they don't make their child responsible to make them feel better.
Yes, I see this a lot with adult
Mm-hmm.
kids. in
Yeah,
particular. So they'll be like, well, I'm super upset by my other son or daughter because they're drinking or they're not
yep,
responding to my text messages. And what do you think I
I
should
know.
do? Are they responding to you? They're not responding to me. And they've all
Hmm.
of a sudden they've triangulated their adult child into the mix
Yeah,
because they feel so lost because the other child, their other adult child isn't speaking to them or they're not
right.
responsive. Would
Right.
that be considered, if that's a pattern, codependency?
Yes. Yeah, because the parent is longing for the child versus in a healthy parent relationship, it really does go more one way. It doesn't mean the child is never going to love the parent, but the teaching, the support really is more going from parent to child, not child to parent. And for a lot of us, that's hard to hear because if we didn't get that growing up, we may expect our child to fill that void instead of realizing that it's our responsibility to fill our void.
Here's the other question. If
Mm-hmm.
you're doing codependent behaviors with a children or adult children, are
Yeah.
you also then probably doing that in romantic relationships, or could you do it in one and not another?
I think it tends to bleed into most relationships, but it might look different. Like in my romantic relationships, I wasn't the same as with women. With women, it was all over the place because that's where I wanted my approval. I wanted that best friend approval. Whereas with my husband, I really didn't need it the same way. Of course, I was in recovery, so that helped. So I do think it can vary depending on where you're finding your validation. Like some people do it with their kids, right? But then with their friends, they're a little bit healthier because they have their kid as their source. So usually people, I think, pick a source, a main one, and then the other behaviors show up in different ways, like not setting boundaries, not telling your truth, not speaking up, those kinds of things.
I see it a lot in couples when they'll come into couples therapy and I'll
Hmm.
say, did you tell them how you felt? And they look at me with deer and
Yeah.
like, oh, heck,
Yeah.
no, I would not tell him. He's going to get upset. He's going to
Right.
get mad at me. I mean, that's one of the signs you're saying if you are not speaking for
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
yourself or what's okay and what's not okay or communicative on what makes
Yeah.
you feel uncomfortable because you're afraid of their response. And I'm not talking
Yeah.
about abusive relationships. Like I'm not talking,
No, I
that's
get it.
separate. You understand.
Right.
Would that be a sign of somebody going, you know what? That's a
Yeah.
tell sign.
Yeah, because most likely they're covering that up with people pleasing and they have a whole story around what the other person is thinking that is probably more related to their childhood versus what's actually currently happening.
Okay, let's talk about stories in codependency. When you say there's a story behind
Hmm.
them, what they think the other person's going
Yeah.
to feel or think, talk to me about the origins of stories and how those come about. Like we believe
Hmm.
that to be true.
Yeah.
I mean, in our minds, we are
Yeah.
convinced that
Right.
that person thinks or feels a certain way.
Right. Well, the codependent person, if they grow up in a family where they were not seen and heard, or maybe they did speak up and the parent yelled at them and said, "You're being too sensitive, stop it." Of course, in relationship, they're going to go, "Ooh, if I say anything, they're going to say the exact same thing because I heard it so many times growing up." So they have this whole scenario in their head of mom's voice going to happen again in their relationship. So they assume that it's really not safe to speak up or set boundaries. And that's when the people pleasing comes in.
So, how do they break the cycle? We got support group, we've got
Hmm.
therapy, we've got family of
Hmm.
origin work, we've got kind of
Hmm.
understanding and looking at
Yeah.
your over functioning, your people pleasing. How do they
Yeah.
begin to take action to change that?
Hmm. Well, this is going to sound super simple, but this is very impactful is start doing less for others and more for yourself. So when you wake up in the morning, what's your day like? Are you focused on the kids, your husband, or your wife or your partner? Like, what are you doing all day versus where are you in that? And can you focus more on what you need versus doing things for others that maybe they could be doing for themselves? Maybe you don't need to worry about what other people are doing. Maybe you ask yourself, what do you need today? Are you tired? Do you need to go shopping? Do you need to make a doctor's appointment because you haven't been doing that? That shift in focus is so powerful because that hyper focus has to stop. And one way to do that is to do less. And part of that is going to make the codependent person really uncomfortable because they're going to want to overfunction because that's where they get their value. So that might be where you give yourself a project. Is there a project you could do for yourself divert that energy into something healthy, because we can't just stop a behavior, right? That's really hard. Sometimes we have to form a new habit and find a new way to put our energy into something more productive.
I can just hear people on the other listening to this feeling really triggered, going, like my mom didn't do any of this stuff for me. Or what if my partner leaves me because they like it that I do acts of service and take care of them, like the fear of abandonment or rejection.
Yep.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So in my course, one of the things I talk about is doing baby steps. So always start with somebody safe. Don't start with your mother, your brother, the person that's the toxic person, because you're not going to have a lot of success yet. But if you can say, okay, what's one boundary? What's one thing you could say no about that is most likely going to go well because you know that person will support it? And that's how you get your sea legs in recovery, is to start doing new behavior with the people who are safest first. You don't want to start with toxic people or family of origin because it's just too hard.
Yeah. I mean, that can be very overwhelming for folks.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people are like, I set boundaries and it didn't go well. And I'm like, yeah, because this is a whole new, they're not used to you showing up with a boundary.
Right. Well, and the boundary has to be something you can control. So the boundary can't be, you need to stop treating me that way, because you can't control that. But the next time somebody mistreats you, you can absolutely say, I'm going to leave. I'll see you later. And send the message that way, because then you can feel like, hey, wow, I did take care of myself, versus I got to get this person to stop what they're doing, because that's control and that's not going to be a realistic goal.
Okay, so we start with doing something for ourselves. We stop the hyperfixation on doing something for other people. Then what else can we do?
Well, as you're doing your recovery work, you're going to be talking and sharing about these issues. So in your meetings, hopefully you're going to be sharing your successes, your frustrations, your pain, because the pain is going to come up as you start to change, because it's really hard to give up these behaviors. It may sound like, oh, well, all you have to do is focus on yourself. No, this is really, really hard. And to go and get support and be seen and cry at your meeting and have a sponsor that walks you through the steps, that's what's going to help give you hope. So having a place to share your pain is actually part of how you're going to heal it.
And I think that is so key, because we're self-medicating by trying to keep safe, which is as a learned pattern, right? Because this is how we did it in our family of origin, to try to please the people to get the love. And if we feel like I'm not pleasing them, that feels really scary to someone.
Yeah, it's a huge change. And that's why baby steps. And even honestly, even if somebody is listening to this and go, I can't do anything right now, I'm paralyzed, just having awareness of, wow, I am codependent. I realize after listening to this, I do overfunction. That is recovery. That is movement in that direction, because part of what we need to do is we need to get sick and tired of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? That's that insanity definition in 12-step programs. And that is growth. So I don't want to give the impression that action is the only form of recovery, because it's not. Awareness is super key. I mean, sometimes I have to go, oh my God, I did it again. But that's okay, because that's the nature of recovery, is it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you just keep going. It's not a perfect process.
Because shame tends to come up, like the shame of something's wrong with me, I'm defective, I'm not good enough, like that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm bad. And so then that shame wants to take us back into the way we've always coped, which is I'll just please somebody else and then I won't feel shame. So then they'll be happy with me. So then you go, okay, how do you heal the shame? Through self-compassion, through self-nurturing yourself.
And that doesn't mean you're going to suddenly not be dependent on these people. It took me years to change that pattern, but I did a little bit more for myself. I started going to meetings regularly. I started talking about this stuff, and that's when it started to move. And slowly over time, sometimes a relationship would crash and burn, and I'd have to learn it that way. But sometimes it was, you know what? I'm not going to call that person today. I'm not going to make 5 phone calls. I'm going to sit with myself. There's little things we can do that can make the difference. It doesn't mean we have to let go of, because sometimes I think people think, oh my God, that means I have to let them go. Not always.
That's a good point. How will someone know if they have to let someone go or not?
Yeah. Well, I think most of us know internally because when we hear the word letting go, we cringe because we kind of know that the relationship is not working for us. And if you know that, and that's why so many of my free resources are about that, because it's like you need to figure out if this relationship is working for you. And if it isn't, eventually that's the goal, is to unwind yourself enough that you can leave. But that doesn't mean you have to do it today.
Yeah, once you start doing the inner child work and the healing work and the support group, you've got more clarity.
Yeah.
When you're in the midst of codependency, I find you're not clear. You don't even know what you want. You
Oh,
don't know
yeah.
what you need. There's no clarity in it. And that's part of
Right.
the recovery process, would you say, is getting clarity?
Oh, absolutely. And again, the first step is, how am I codependent? Oh my gosh, I am codependent with my kid. I'm codependent with my friends. That is the first step in growth, is to start realizing where these traits are showing up for you.
Okay, how am I codependent? That's a great question. Because if you're just like discovering this, you've heard the term, but you're like, I'm not codependent. And then you're hearing some of
Right.
these examples and you're going, oh, well, that does resonate. I do overfunction with my kids. I do because I don't
Yeah.
want them to get upset with me, or I don't want them to feel the same way I felt about my mom. So, like you
Mm,
said, I've
hmm.
swung the pendulum. Like even
Right.
recognizing these early signs. And that's what I really want to hone in
Hmm.
on. Like, what are we're
Yeah.
over functioning? You've named some of them. Is there anything else that you think are signs in this discovery phase?
Well, not taking care of your wants and needs, not knowing what you want. Boundaries are huge. Usually people are not speaking up. They're not even sharing a difference of opinion because they think somebody is not going to like that. So they're quiet. They're really good at reading the room. So they're super focused on other people's feelings, but sometimes they can't feel their own because it's too painful. So they feel empathy when other people are hurting, and that's how they feel, but they don't know how to feel for themselves. But you're making an important point, is that codependency is on a continuum. You can have some, you can have moderate amount of symptoms, and you can be full blown, it's everywhere. So some people are going to relate to being controlling, wanting to control the outcome because that's a sign of, I'm going to stay safe if I can control people, places, and things. Others are going to relate to feeling like the chameleon. I change no matter who I'm with because I got to make sure I'm okay. My personality needs to reflect what I think is needed in the moment. So it's really important that it's okay for people to realize that you may relate to a few symptoms or a lot. You don't have to relate to everything, because I think that's where sometimes people go, well, I'm not codependent because I'm really good at speaking up. Some codependents are. I know someone that was really good at speaking up, but they were not good at validating themselves and not over functioning. So it really can look different on different people.
It is such a nuanced dive into
Yes.
different types of codependency, because I find people think, well, I'm independent. I'm an independent person,
Yeah.
and therefore I'm not codependent. It's almost like a hyper independence. I mean, that's what you're talking about, over functioning. Like you're doing everything, but it's almost like a hyper independence. Could that be codependency in a way?
It depends. To me, the independence is usually lacking in codependency because we feel like that you complete me is our motto. If you're hyper independent, you're really walling yourself off, which can be part of definitely growing up in a dysfunctional family. But people who do that might then only have one source of somebody that they need all their love and validation, but everyone else they wall off. So that could be, I think most of the time with codependency, you see the dependency more clearly
More
as a
prominently.
pattern. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone says, you know what? I'm raising my hand. I'm doing it with my kid. I can see it with my kids. It's easier because I'm over functioning. I'm wanting them to be liked by everybody. I'm wanting to be in the in group. I'm
Yeah.
wanting them to be good at sports. I'm wanting them to get the good
Hmm.
grades. And I am
Right.
trying to control everything, like their activities and what they wear and how they do their hair and makeup,
Hmm.
or maybe who they're hanging
Hmm.
with. Would that be a
Yeah.
good indicator for someone to go, you know what? We probably need to take a look at this.
Yeah. And I would have them ask themselves, how does this remind you of you and your childhood? Like, what's getting triggered here? Because most likely that person may have had a parent that weren't involved in their life and left them alone so that they didn't get that time and attention. So We grow up doing the exact opposite, which is I'm going to shower my kid with attention, but it's too much.
Yeah. Or they didn't feel liked in their
Right.
teenagehood, right?
Right.
And their parent was like, well, why don't you hang out with so and so? And why don't you hang out with so and so? They were worried about image. And I find that
Yeah.
can lead to codependence.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. Like that straight A student that has to be perfect versus, you know what? It's okay to get a B or a C. It's not going to end your life.
It's not going to
Yeah.
define you. But if you're worried about image, I find that can create a lot
Yeah.
of codependency.
Oh,
We're worried about
absolutely.
what people think of us and whether we're going to be liked and
Yeah.
we're going to be, and then the parents projecting their inner child stuff
Yeah.
onto the kid and wanting them to not
Right.
experience that same shame that they felt, but they're almost like
Right.
over functioning in that way and becoming
Yeah.
controlling.
That's a really good example of generational codependency where the parent is doing it and then the child learns to do the same thing by over functioning to please.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people can identify as people pleasers rather than
Mhm.
codependents. Can you talk about that? Like someone that go, yeah, I'm a people pleaser. I want people to like me. I want to likes. And they see that, but they
Yeah.
don't see the jump to codependency.
Yeah. Well, and you can want to please others as long as there's a limit. But if there isn't a limit and that is your source for your value and getting worth, that's when it bleeds into codependency because you're really, again, hyper focusing on what someone else is going to give you versus most of us want to please others on occasion, and that's normal. But if we're doing that because that's how we get our value, that's a different animal. That's where giving ourselves away because our behavior is really the only way we can get love versus saying, you know what, this is who I am. And I deserve love because I'm a good person versus I only deserve love if I'm doing something for you. Then it gets really muddled.
Yeah. And I find a lot of people feel that way. Like I've got to earn your love.
Yeah.
It's a younger part of them that feels like they have to earn
Mm-hmm.
their love to feel secure
Right.
and safe and that the person's going to love them
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
leave
Well, see,
them.
that's why therapy and group support is so important because if we try to do that ourselves in isolation, it's going to be really, really tough. But if we have those people who are further along, giving us hope, showing us, hey, you can start to feel better about yourself, you can express your pain and let it be heard, then that's going to help start shifting you into more healthy behavior by just getting the support you need.
How does someone begin to love themselves? Because that's the antidote, really, right? To feel like they are giving themselves that approval and that acknowledgement,
Yeah,
that validation and affirmation. How do we begin
right.
to do that?
I think the easiest way is to think about the compliments you've gotten over the years because there's usually a theme and start to own it. Like if you're being told, oh my God, you're so funny, you're so entertaining, great. Maybe that's a part of you you can claim and say, yeah, you know what, I am. That is one of my gifts. But part of what we have to do is also change that definition of what we think self-esteem is because I've heard this so many times with codependent people is they think, oh, that means I'm bragging. And no, self esteem is you are equal to, not better than, not less than, but you are equal to. And that's what we want to strive for is I am a good person. I'm not the best person on the planet. I'm not the worst person on the planet, but I'm good. I'm trying. I deserve love and support for being who I am. That's the goal to find that middle ground, not going from, oh, now I have to be the best or now I have to be the worst so that you can feel better and I can feel worse because healthy self-esteem is really about being equal.
I like that definition, equal to. No one's above us, no one's
Yeah.
below us, because a lot of codependents have kind of this someone's one up on us, like better than
Right.
us.
Right. That's part of the disease. We got to be better than in order to get any love at all versus, well, wait a minute. What if you didn't have to give 120%? What if that was okay?
Because we're all equal. At the end of the day, no one's better,
Yeah.
no one's worse. And that's when you know you're in the healing journey part,
Right.
because you see your worth and
Right.
value. You're equal to, no one's above, no one's below. You start stepping into
Right.
owning who you are and
Yeah.
some of your gifts.
And that's where you need a support system because if you try to do that with your existing support system and they're all, no, 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 we want you to overgive because that benefits us. And they push back, then you're going to feel like you're drowning, like, oh my God, I can never change this pattern. Versus if you have some new peeps over here that you can practice and talk out that stuff, that's going to help you build that skill, because sometimes it's really hard to build it with the support system we built because they're used to us over functioning and they don't want to give it up.
Yeah, that feels really good.
No
Especially
kidding.
if someone's love language is acts of service and you're just over
Yep.
here giving acts of service like it's candy.
Yeah.
It's going to be a
Right.
challenge. So, can we give a practical, like, let's give a first step to somebody, like, they're going to start doing some things for themselves. They're going to stop over functioning. They're going to take a baby step.
Mm-hmm.
How would they verbalize that? Because I find a lot of people like, I don't even know what to say. Like, I don't have the words.
Well, I think sometimes it's easiest to just share what you're doing. Like, I'm just going to practice doing less because I realize that I tend to take responsibility for too much and it kind of wipes me out. If you feel safe enough, you could say that. You could just say, or I'm just practicing doing less. That's all I'm doing today. And then the other person will be like, oh, because that's going to help them understand, oh, we're actually starting to change and do something different. And being able to let the other person in on that is going to help them understand where we're coming from and that the change is about us, not about what they've done to us.
Okay. So let's say you're making your 17-year-old lunch every day for school. Let's just take this example. Okay. You're doing the lunches and you're getting mad. You're like, I'm so sick of doing these lunches. Why don't they do their own lunches? How would you coach someone to verbally set that boundary for you're not going to do the lunches anymore? How would they go about doing that?
So I would have a conversation and say, I noticed that I'm doing too much. And I want to help encourage you to start doing some things for yourself because I think it's going to help you feel good about yourself. So I'm going to start to change this pattern because our kids know. Our kids know when we're over functioning. And it becomes a teaching moment. So it's not about making the kid wrong. It's not about, well, you haven't been making your lunches and you need to do this. It's about, I realize I've sort of done this and it's not necessarily a healthy behavior and I'm going to do something different. And the first couple of days when they don't make their lunch, you may have to leave the room and go scream in a towel, but they'll learn it. That's where I think our codependency recovery can really help our kids stop the cycle when we verbalize that, hey, we're going to start to change some of these patterns because we realize they're not really healthy. But we also have to be careful not to overshare and burden our kids with more of the deeper pain and issues that they don't necessarily need to know about.
Yes, but I like how you're not saying, well, you need to make your lunches. Well, you need to do this and that. I mean, you're owning your own process. You're not oversharing.
Right.
You're making them make you feel better. And they may not like it. And you have to tolerate.
They might not.
And your window of tolerance for the discomfort of them being upset with you to go, that's okay. I can nurture myself through that.
And you could even do a baby step where I'll make your sandwich, you do everything else. Like if that's too scary for you, break it up. Make them grab their fruit and drink. You know what I mean? Something where you feel like, okay, I'm heading in that direction. Because sometimes we think it's all or nothing, but even in something like a lunch, you could break that up.
And I like giving these practical strategies because people can kind of start clicking in their minds. Oh, that's a codependent behavior. I didn't even recognize that. Right. And it's just something simple, but it's something that you can start kind of assessing in your own life. A lot of what I love on this podcast is self-reflection, just taking an inventory, getting curious with compassion. Oh, is there any invitation for me here to take a look at maybe my codependent parts or parts that I didn't even realize that were codependent that are inviting me into some deeper healing work so I can stop the generational cycle. Even though it may look different than my childhood, I can still see I'm over functioning in these areas with my partner, with my kids, with my grandkids, and my friendships at work, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would add about codependent recovery or discovery?
You can also start doing some affirmations or create a mantra. Like when something happens, like someone else is doing something that is making your skin crawl and you feel like you need to step in, find a statement like, this is none of my business. It's okay. Breathe. Wait 10 minutes. Like if you can have a mantra to actually remind yourself that this is not yours, you don't have to take any action right now. It's okay. That can help you because that's going to come up a lot. That desire to jump in, and affirmations can be tricky for codependent people because they don't like the I am enough, I am beautiful. I'm not talking about those type of affirmations. I'm talking about something you can tell yourself that says, it's okay to stop and do nothing. Because usually that's a huge deal for the codependent person.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's something to anchor you, kind of come
Yes.
back to and center you when you're kind of starting to want to overfunction and you're feeling you want to control an outcome. You want to like get that security or words of affirmation or whatever your reassurance. Come back to your mantra, come back to that piece to anchor you. I like that. Where can people find you? If they're like, you know what, I want to know more. I want to dive into more codependent work. Where can they find you?
So my website is counselingrecovery.com. And I have a YouTube channel for Michelle Farris, Relationships That Work. And I have lots of free resources. I have a assessment checklist for people. I have some codependent prompts for self-care and boundaries. So I have lots of stuff on my website if people are interested.
Fantastic. I know you're putting so much good content out there. We'll link everything in the show notes too. So go out on our YouTube channel, get her downloads on our website. That's how you begin. This is resonating with you on some level. Start the work. You will not regret it. I promise you, it will change your life when you start going, oh, this is a codependent behavior. I didn't even know that. It's like you pulled the curtain back and now you can begin the healing process. So I'm so glad you're here today listening. Grab Michelle's, all her resources that are available out there for you. And thank you so much for joining us today on Close the Chapter. It was so enlightening and so helpful. And I appreciate the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much. Appreciate what you're doing too.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.